So how is everyone doing this fine day?
Yeah, this is abnormal and off the shelf without Seki.
I know. Who would have thought? So what we did is this is going to be about a video game franchise, one that I've been more invested in than Knick-Knack, but Knick-Knack recently got into just because it's in the remakes. Persona 3 Reload.
Yeah, I mean, if you can follow the history of me playing Persona on this channel, because I did not. When we watched the first Persona 3 movie, I hadn't touched or looked at Persona in my fucking life.
Yeah.
And then, like, by the time we finish all the movies, I've played Royal, but not 3.
Yeah, but not 3, because by this point, Reload has not been made yet, and I forget, when did we publish the movies?
Oh, it was years ago now.
Yeah, it's been a while, but we did do a review of the Persona 3 movies, but honestly, the movies, they really pale in comparison to the full length of, honestly, of the game. So.
And then lo and behold, this comes out, and I played 5, I can play this.
Yeah. Knick-Knack does actually have a copy of Fess as well.
Yeah.
Though
he shows up.
Yeah. Though he only got to about the first full moon boss and then stopped.
Yeah, I never finished that first full moon boss.
Yeah. So yeah, most of my history with at least 3, even though it is my favorite one of the series, is just coming down to mostly me playing Portable and watching a lot of other YouTube videos kind of covering some of the events of the game for the most part, just because it was so dated and like hard to find on major platforms until Atlas finally did a re-release of it on Steam.
Yeah, for the longest time, it was pretty hard to actually play most of the Persona games that weren't called 5.
Yep.
Like, you had 5 on PlayStation.
Yep.
And that was the easiest way to play any of them.
Yep.
Unless you had a Vita.
Mm-hmm. Which I did, and so I was able to play 4 Golden and Portable, but yeah, like, for a while there, like, all the Persona games were really hard to get a hold of, because they were on systems that either weren't quite as popular, or if they were just a more niche title, since they were exclusives mostly to Sony. Yeah?
So it's not like they're that hard to get a hold of if you have the console that they're on. Like,
yeah.
I don't think I've seen, like, 4 Golden on the PS Vita, like, you could still get it for relatively cheap.
Oh, yeah.
Even though is the store gone already?
Not yet.
I know
They meant
not
to get rid of it. They were going to get rid of it, but then there wasn't too much outcry for it, and then Sony caved, and then they kept it around.
But like, Fast Year, I picked this up for like $20-$30 at GameStop.
Yeah. So you can still, like, if you have the hardware for it and you don't want to emulate, you can still play the old games.
Yeah.
They're still very much available. They're not rare to find, like, some, like, Nintendo titles are to this day.
That said, like, some people would say if you want the definitive version of 3, you probably should emulate Fest and just install the fucking Katone mod that's being worked on.
Yeah, there's that as well. But
yeah,
we're gonna talk about the main game here. We can talk about Kotone when we get to it in this discussion.
I have a few questions, but this is about Reload.
Yeah, we're doing a review on Reload here. So, I guess what are some of your main pressing questions, if you have any?
Like, you want to start gameplay or story here? Because, like, obviously, this is the first time we've done an off-the-shelf on a video game.
I guess we'll just start with gameplay, because I think it's going to be a relatively shorter section, since it is, at the end of the day, an RPG. Yeah?
It's complicated for me. Like, I think it feels really, really good to play. Like, it's... It's got the style, the pizzazz, and like I think even the response. Like, part of what makes Persona 5 so fun to play is the responsiveness of the inputs and how it feels like you're always, like, everything feels like something's going on when you click a button in combat.
Yeah.
I feel like in 3 Reload they carried that over perfectly, and combat's really, really fun to play in Persona games at this point. Like, I think they've got it down to like the most refined I've ever seen a turn-based combat.
Yeah, and that's kind of the one thing that Atlas does really well is their turn-based combat, because they've had the system since SMT, but there's a few tweaks that Persona gets to the One More system that they use that kind of really, I think, help it feel like a much more approachable RPG than some other ones might be. Mm-hmm. And that's mostly just the way that One Mores work, where basically if you hit anyone's weakness, you just get an extra turn that you can use to your advantage.
And I think the introduction of the baton pass or the shift by the time you get to 3 reload, that mechanic really helps things feel even more snappy on top of the Persona 3 and 4 one more system.
Yeah.
And its iterations on the press turn from Shin Megami Tensei.
Yeah.
Which I actually have more experience with than the classic one more system from 3 and 4.
Yeah. But the press turn system is weird because I have played a little bit of Nocturne and some of SMT 5. And the press turn system is a little bit more restrictive, I find, mostly just because you don't get to really pass your turn to like your other party members.
Well, that was the case in 3 and 4 as well. You couldn't pass your turn.
Yeah. So I think even 5 you can't pass your turn though, so it's still a bit of a dated mechanic.
I believe you could in 5. You just had to play darts with people, whereas in Royal they switched it so you didn't have to do the dart minigame.
Oh, okay. There might have been like something that I didn't get to because you couldn't do it like in the early game. I didn't get super far into SMT 5 mostly.
Oh, SMT 5? No, not SMT 5.
Yeah,
Persona 5.
Yeah, I was talking about SMT 5.
No, that's still not a thing in SMT. To my
yeah, so the press turn system is interesting as far as like SMT goes, just because this is part of the overlapping series.
Yeah, you can see the similarities, but like, I think the big thing that I don't know. I'm although I have played 4, like a good, like not all of 4, not even a good majority of 4, but I played enough of a chunk of 4 to get a feel for it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I've got enough of a feel for it to really understand the press turn system as a like where it distinguishes itself from just the original Persona 3 and 4 systems.
Yeah.
Other than the lack of like all out attack kind of stuff.
Yeah, because there is a bit of a lack of like you can't just like use all of your party members in SMT to attack everyone in a synchronized way. So that's another thing that's missing from there. So there is a bit more of a reason to just continue like going for weaknesses, mostly just for the extra damage though.
Yeah. I think so outside of just combat, I also think this is something I found actually kind of refreshing coming out of 5.
Mm-hmm.
The social stats felt a lot less intrusive than 3.
Yeah, and that's mostly just because 3 has less overall social stats. They do each have one higher point. They go up to 6 here instead of 5.
Mm-hmm.
But there's overall less social stats, so less of your time in game is overall spent on leveling up social stats. So you kind of do just have more time to worry about social links, so long as you have meet all the requirements to start them.
There's just never a point in the game where a social link is downright interrupted by not having a high enough social stat.
Yeah.
Like the social stats, there are 3 social stats, and they unlock things for you to do in the game, but the only social link it'll affect in game is the three female party members.
Yeah. You have to max charm for Yukari, you have to max guts for Fuka, and you have to max knowledge in order to do Mitsuru. What?
Yeah.
And then guts does have a bit more of an impact overall, because like there's certain things like you can't go into the nightclub if you don't, I think, have at least rank 2 guts. And then there are a few other tiers for social stats that do matter. I think for Tanaka Social Link, you also have to have max charm in order to talk to him, or at least rank 5.
I know some of this was additions and reload, but it felt like there was a lot more opportunity to just find additional social stat buffs from just doing things like interact, like just little hangouts with people here and there.
Yeah.
Like they all gave you social stats.
Mm-hmm. So that way,
keep things like it was moving along quicker.
Yeah, and that way it didn't feel like you were like wasting your time like doing other things. You can at least like go in and do some of these like party member things and not feel like your time is wasted. Like, oh, I should be really focusing on my social stats right now. When in reality, you can also just do stuff with your party members, so that way you can gain some of the extra social stats.
And the last like bit of simplification that I appreciated over 5 was none of the social links were actually like none of the ones like had a mid-social link time walk. That pissed me off a couple times in 5.
Yeah, that's the nice thing here is that you can kind of just focus on a social link. Your only real limitation is whether or not they're available on a given day. Yeah? You're not locked behind some time prerequisite for the most part. Like, the only ones that really technically have that are the Hermit and Sun, and that's mostly just because there's only one day out of the week that you can even interact with those social links.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like you're even limited from starting those social links once you find them. So, much more overall, I feel like a simplified system that I like in comparison to Royal, because I think one of the most annoying things for me was especially Sojuro's social link and Royal specifically. You were basically locked to rank 3 until you got to like the later half of the game.
Yeah, and when all the social links can't be completed until you get to like towards the very end of the base game, it's just like, well, now you're spending the end of the base game rushing the social links, and you're only going to finish a handful of them.
Yeah.
God forbid you forgot, like, you were delayed in starting any single one of them. You're never finishing that sucker.
Right, and then you've also got like other weird cases. This is a spoiler discussion, so I don't think it really matters anyways. But a catchy social link, for example, you would be hard pressed to realize.
You might want to be a little bit closer. Hold back a little bit on 5 spoilers.
Okay.
I don't mind 3 spoilers.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, you don't realize that you only need to get his social link until like 6, unless you like continue to talk with him, and then the rest of it just auto completes after that.
Yeah, for 3 spoilers, I think we're safe. I think 5 spoilers, we should be a little bit more careful.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Then there's the fucking elephant in the room, gameplay-wise.
Yeah.
Tartarus.
Yeah, Tartarus. It is still a single dungeon. It is still, like, they've definitely improved it from the original variants.
Yeah, having played the first block of the original variant, it is a very big improvement.
Yeah, it's more visually interesting, and it's nice that what they did with the monad system, because in the original games, Fez and Portable, I actually think at least
it was just I did actually do some research on this. Wasn't it just the an extra block? It was an optional block of Tartarus.
Yeah, it was an optional separate block of Tartarus that you progressed separately, but had like super like high level enemies where you could use essentially to grind. That was essentially your grinding zone. But here, the way they did it is different, where essentially it'll have rewards at the end of the doors that you can pick up. Usually these are like rare gems or whatever that you need in order to give your party members better gear. But the thing is that I find it hard to even want to use some of this gear that you can get, because you're oftentimes better off saving those gems for the later tier gears that you can get closer towards the end game. So it really ends up kind of feeling somewhat pointless to really even do these monad doors in the early game.
I always did them more for EXP and easy Arcana cards.
Yeah.
But I actually didn't go for a lot of the late game gear.
Yeah.
Because I didn't feel like I really needed it.
Yeah.
Like maybe okay. I didn't fight the Elizabeth, or I did fight the Elizabeth boss. I didn't beat the Elizabeth boss though.
Yeah. So
Realm actually got to watch me do that one.
yeah, and it was not happening.
No.
It was not happening.
Maybe if I had like gone and got some of the better gear, I could have tried it more. But
I guess this comes... Okay, so since we're still on the topic of gameplay, kind of, this is kind of the other issue that I have with the series as a whole, is that even though you don't necessarily need to min-max everything, it's really heavily encouraged as far as, like, these super bosses are concerned.
I mean, isn't that just a matter of... I guess, I don't know how often you play RPGs where you do have like growth over the course of the game and stats, but that feels pretty par for the course for super bosses in RPGs.
Yeah,
it's something similar in Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I don't play them as much, but it's mostly just because a lot of RPGs do ultimately just kind of come down to numbers and how much damage you end up doing to a boss or a set of enemies at the given time. Because after a certain point, the floor enemies just don't matter, because they'll all just run away from you.
Yeah, that's... I think the beginning of every Tartarus block is kind of cool.
Yeah.
It's when you get about a quarter of the way in and you're like, oh god.
Yeah.
I've still got 40 more floors of this bullshit to do.
Yeah, and the enemies aren't even terrified of you anymore, depending on what difficulty you're playing on.
Yeah, it's just like, I'm beating these same enemies over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. So, it does get a bit tedious at times. I mean, it got tedious to the point where I just said, fuck it, even though I did want to do the secret boss in Persona 3 Reload, I was just like, I don't got the patience to do this shit anymore, I'm just going to finish the game. So, Yeah, I was going for like a best gear for every party member kind of run before I went New Game Plus, but I just said, fuck it, I'll just get what I can, and then just, if I care enough later, I'll come back and do this again.
Yeah, New Game Plus is kind of where you have to have the completionist mindset over the, compared to the base. It's hard to do a completionist run of the base game.
Yeah. So, I mean, I got pretty damn close to it. There were only a few things that I didn't do. I missed like 3 social links. And then there is another achievement that you can get if you get, I think it's like 50,000 yen from doing part-time jobs. And then you have
I wonder if I got that. I did a lot of part-time work.
Probably not unless you got the achievement for it, but...
I don't remember seeing whether... Because I don't track my achievements very well.
Yeah. So that's one thing that you do. And then the other thing that I didn't do was collect all the town Twilight Fragments, because there are Twilight Fragments that you can pick up on certain parts of the map, but I don't know if all of them are like limited to certain days and times where you can pick them up in order to give that one.
I just stopped seeing them after a while, so I assumed I got them all.
Yeah, so, but there is an achievement associated with getting them all, so I'm wondering, like, if it is possible to find them all, like, regardless of what point in time you're at, or if there are only certain days where all the Twilight Fragments are available. So, that's something to keep in mind. If you are a completionist, make sure you look up where all those Twilight Fragments are, because I certainly didn't find all of them. So, yeah.
I mean, so we've had slightly different experiences playing the game, because you played it on Merciless for the vast majority of the game.
I did, and it started off like it's a pretty decent challenge, but because I was also like hyper-focused on making sure that I could get good personas, I didn't really end up having any issues with like my party being underleveled or my main lead being underleveled. The only reason that I stopped playing on Merciless is because I figured out is that you don't essentially get a redo, or like your save data, you start completely over if you try to reload your Merciless data. So it's essentially like you're playing from a fresh playthrough all over again. So I'm just like,
well, then why don't I just start a fresh playthrough?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
it's a fresh playthrough, except you can also see that you completed these social links.
Yep, exactly. So I just said, screw it, I'm just going to set it to... I ended up setting it to peaceful difficulty just to save myself the hassle. So that was something. But at some point, if I do have the will to go back to it, I will try a Merciless 100% run through over again, just for the challenge of it, because Nyx was very underwhelming as a boss fight.
He also had it on fucking peaceful.
Yeah. So
not that it was that much harder for me. I was playing on normal across the entire... I just played from beginning to end on normal.
Yeah.
And yeah, I felt the RPG... the difficulty in the early parts of the game, pretty well balanced, actually.
Yeah.
But and this is just the case whenever you're playing RPG, especially... And Persona's always been this way on normal. To my understanding, it was this way in 5 as well. Once you hit a certain point, things become just absolute, utter fucking jokes to me. Because you're naturally just going to eat, no matter what you do, you're naturally going to end up not min-maxing, but grabbing some of the busted stuff and knowing where that comes from.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
80 hours into a game, of course.
Yep. You're just going, after a certain point, you're just going to get powerful enough to where no matter what enemy that you come across, they are just going to eventually run from you if they are not a boss.
Also, I think I've heard this is the case in Persona in general. Late game physical attacks are freaking busted.
Yes, they are.
Especially once your healer... Hey, Vaughn, we're actually technically recording something right now.
Oh, terribly sorry then.
Yeah, I told you to come by knowing you'd be coming and not have any idea he was here.
Yep.
Oh my.
It was an accident. We'll tell you the story later.
Okay. Yes. I will wait over here. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Once your healer gets, back onto this, once your healer gets Yukari especially, once she gets the spell, it's just, your entire party's fully healed.
Yep.
Or even Ken, once you get his secondary skill that just restores his SP,
yeah,
you don't worry about dying and losing your HP as much, so dropping your best physical skills, why not?
Yeah. Short of the enemies having resistance to that physical type, because it is a little bit different here, where there are subtypes of physical damage, unlike in the other Persona games. 4 is just a single type. There's not even gun in that, and then 5 has gun damage.
The only reason to use elemental attacks that aren't being amped by your specific persona later on is just for the floor enemies.
Yeah.
Just so you can clear them with less SP usage.
Yeah, and you honestly don't. And the thing is, though, is that you don't even need to like super like min max for those floor enemies either, because you're already getting the bonus damage off of the weakness effect once you know the floor enemy's weakness. So like as long as you have like the skill they're weak to, and then the boost skills, you can get away with even like Agidine. You don't even need the highest tier like Inferno, which is the.
If you have moderate, you're just fine. Like
Yeah, even moderate is fine. Like even just like putting in the boost skills, you'll do good damage.
And if your party's not down, like all out attacks will do most of the work anyways if you can down them all already.
Yeah.
Then you just make up the difference with physical, and then give one single magic persona a couple amps and almighty.
Yeah. One goofy build that I wanted to try, but I never ended up doing it because I just didn't have the patience to grind out for it, is I think it's a special weapon you can get for the main character that needs Siegfried's heart item. I can't remember exactly if it was him. But it's a sword that does it just does the regular damage. It's like one tier below his ultimate sword, and it ignores enemies' resistances to physical moves. So even if they null or repel or drain slash, it'll just ignore that damage. So what I wanted to do was a goofy build, like essentially a meme build, where I would just use charge and I would just primary attack with the protagonist.
Only basic attack run.
Yeah, basically. That was my that was one thing I wanted to try out, just to see like how goofy I could make it, and then just like add in a bunch of other passive skills to like boost that damage, and then the crit rate, so that way I could just like crit with the primary attack, basically making it so that way I am the persona.
Yeah, I think for both of us though, by the time you hit Nyx, you're shaving through Nyx like butter.
Oh yeah.
Especially if you killed the Reaper even once.
Yeah, because honestly though, even though I don't know how it was in Fez, because there are some AI differences between this version of the Reaper and the Fez version of the Reaper. But in this one, he's a little bit easier in some aspects.
There's that exploit for killing him at level like 16, right?
Yeah, where basically, well, it isn't technically an exploit, but it's basically an exploit.
Yeah, I haven't tried that though, so like.
That's something I'll probably do if I do decide to go back to Merciless. Just like, so I'm not going to get too into it because it is a bit of a meta strategy, but basically you fear yourself and you have repel physical and you make the Reaper kill himself at a super low level. So that's the gist of the strategy. Look it up. It's on YouTube. You can see it for yourself. But yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about gameplay, so I mean, unless you have something else to mention, I think we can move on a little bit more to story.
Yeah, I'm down to move to story.
Okay. So, for this is definitely my favorite story out of the ones. Like, I know a lot of people's like first experience with Persona was definitely Royal, or for some even Persona 4. But for me, personally, I felt the most attachment to 3's story out of all of them. And it's mostly just because it is kind of like a timeless story in and of itself, where a lot of the themes are related to Greek tragedy, where essentially, this is mentioned more so like offhand, or I wouldn't even say offhand in the game, but this is like a related story, where Aigis actually has a lot of commonalities with the Greek figure Sisyphus, where he's constantly, pushing the boulder up the hill, but then the boulder falls back down regardless of his efforts. So there's a lot more parallels, and then also everyone's persona is based off of someone from Greek history or Greek mythology. Like, for example, you've got the main protagonist's first persona, Orpheus. I forget. So there's a whole bunch of story as far as Orpheus and his myths go. But the most common one is the one where he goes to the underworld to meet Hades to try and rescue his wife, and then he tries to bring her back, and he almost gets to the end, but he can't look back at his wife. He just has to basically trust that she's still there with him. And he gets out, but he looks back, but he doesn't realize that she hasn't yet crossed the threshold, and so when he looks back, his wife gets taken back to the underworld again. So
a lot of themes of futility there.
yes, exactly. And then I'm trying to remember if there are any other like major ones. I mean, Yukari has Io as her starter. And then she eventually evolves into Isis. I don't know the full tale of that persona specifically.
I don't know about Isis in Greek mythology.
Yeah.
Io in Greek mythology was the woman that Zeus fucked as a bull.
That's what it was. Yeah.
That's why her persona has
the chain.
A woman riding a bull.
Yep.
Head.
Yep, as a bull head. Yep. I'm trying to remember some of the other ones.
You're trying to remember that. I actually really appreciated that the Persona Awakenings were tied to story this time.
Yes, that was a very nice thing that I like about Persona 3, at least in comparison to the other, like, even 4 and onward.
It feels kind of goofy when I'm using Persona 5 and I didn't have enough time to get to Yusuke, and I'm in the final month. Everyone's using their best version of their personas, and Yusuke still has his his original persona.
Right. Yeah. So there's that.
It makes the entire party feel like they're actually growing as the story goes on.
Yeah, they're growing as the story going on as it goes on, and it feels nice that the party kind of does develop without your direct input, because it means that these characters, like, they do grow, like, regardless of whether or not your input. Like, yes, it's like heavily implied that you're also part of that reason, but you're not the mutual reason. Whereas like 4, it really, like, your teammates kind of really lean into you too much.
Yeah, like Legas, there was a party member that had a romance that wasn't with the protagonist. Like, that's shocking. That should
never ever. So yeah, there's a lot of that. I didn't remember any of the other personas. I mean, there is some.
There's Thanatos.
Yeah, there is. Okay, so here's one actually I do want to talk about. So the persona, or the main protagonist, does have 3 evolutions of his persona, technically speaking. Kind of like how in Royal there's 3 evolutions, and in Golden there are as well. But in this case, it actually only happens for the protagonist, because the other party members don't get through tiers for their personas. But Thanatos is essentially the embodiment of death that was sealed inside the protagonist, and is essentially what Ryoji would be if he stayed a shadow, if he didn't get binded to the protagonist. So, and that's kind of where I had mentioned this to you before we started the recording. So, but the other thing kind of going on with Ryoji there is that because he's been with Makoto all this time, he essentially became Makoto's shadow. And so when he evolves from Pharos into Ryoji, he is essentially the repressed emotions of the protagonist at that point in the story. And so you can see him, like, you can even see this, he shares the exact same face model with the protagonist. The only difference is their hairstyle, and I think, yeah, his eyes are much brighter blue, which is essentially a reflection where Ryoji is more, despite being the incarnation of death, he is very interested in life, and he is very interested in the living. So that's kind of one of the other more parallels. He's essentially Makoto's own repressed feelings of joy and wonder for life. So that's the main difference here. So that's kind of Ryoji's whole shtick, at least before he becomes the Harbinger.
So yeah, I haven't really given my thoughts on the story yet, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm a little bit less impressed with it than I think a lot of people are.
Mm-hmm.
I think the story, There are aspects I like. I like the dynamic is definitely unique compared to 4 and 5's group dynamic,
Yeah.
where they're not really friends at the start. They're more coworkers at the start.
Yeah, they
and
are.
You feel them grow into their friendship across the story. And when there's drama, because they don't need to have that veneer of friendship all of the time, it feels more impactful and more down to earth when they start fighting with each other. There's never a fight between the characters that feels like, I won't say what happens there, but there was a fight in Persona 5 between the characters that everyone just hates.
Oh,
we don't need to go into that.
We don't need to go into that one, but I know. I know
Yeah.
exactly which one you're talking about.
There's never a moment where it feels like that here. I think it's because they let the characters be something other than friends at times.
Yeah. That's kind of like what this game excels at, honestly, is essentially making the characters feel more realistic.
Yeah, you feel the progression of their relationship with each other across the story. It's not just, there's an arc, we're friends now. But also I have, my problems with the story, I think, come in 2 aspects. The first one is the one that's easiest to remember right now. It's the overarching story.
Yeah.
I think the overarching story leaves a lot to be desired. The relationships and the themes are rich.
Yeah.
But, like, the actual, like, these experiments release the 12 Arcana Shadows and then Nyx coming down. All of that felt... It didn't feel as like it was naturally progressing into each other. It felt like moving on to a new sort of, not arc, but a new sort of plot beat. We were like exposited right into it. It felt more like... I don't want to say the problem. It's a little rough because it feels like month to month you start getting into that repetitive cycle.
Right. Yeah.
It's more it feels more like a gameplay excuse to keep going than anything. And not very much needs to be said about Strega. I think I actually did go on a Strega rant when we did the movies.
Yeah. Because Strega, like, even though they get more fleshing out here than even in Fez, they are still kind of just, at the end of the day, villains in a sense. They get more characterization, and you get to kind of see, like, more where they come from, as they were essentially experiments, like, done by the Kirijo group as false persona users, where essentially they have to constantly take these medications to make sure that their persona doesn't go berserk on them. But what is interesting is that this does have, like, other implications where even if a person doesn't have the potential to use a persona, they can be forced into it. But there is a lot of danger associated with it. There's a lot, because of the gun motif, there's a lot more of a heavy weight to summoning your persona than in 4 or 5, where essentially every time you're summoning the persona, you're accepting that you are mortal and that you will die, and that you have to be able to accept that fact in order to summon this power from within you. Well,
yeah. I think the problems with Strega come down to the problems with the story, because they straight up cut Strega. Like, basically.
Yeah.
Like, there's an entire ass endgame arc where there's a cult worshipping the fall of humankind. That is not mentioned once in the movies.
No.
They just show up and get murked in a montage in the movies.
Yeah, they really did Strega dirty in the movies. So.
And then here, they build them up more, but also, like, the Kirijo group. I don't feel like we really got to look into that as much as, say, there are some very similar plot beats in 5 on experimentation, and even Strikers, when you get to 5 Strikers. And I feel like the fact that, like, we got a lot more overarching with that there. Here, I feel like we didn't go into the Kirijo group quite enough.
The problem
for Strega to really have the impact. You don't find out about the experiments until the literal last fight with Jin, I think.
Yeah, it's Jin and Takaya, where you figure that out.
And it's like, again, it's just dropped on you.
It's
like,
more
block of exposition.
Yeah, it's more block of exposition. So the last half of the game gets very exposition heavy. But honestly, as far as the Kirijo group goes and more of that, you honestly get more of that in a spin-off in Persona 4 Arena.
Of course, it's the damn fighting game.
Yeah, it's the fighting game that gives you all the exposition as far as the other groups and how they kind of play into the overarching story. So, yeah. It's not something you get, unfortunately, as much of in the main series.
I feel like we needed more of a Khadijah group for Strega to really have any kind of impact at all.
Yeah.
And I heard it was even worse in 3. Like the original
Oh,
3
it was awful in 3 because you got like literally no exposition. You didn't even have that like side by side fight where the protagonist fights next to Takaya in that one moment.
So I did this day before yesterday.
Yeah.
I don't know if you did it because it was kind of easy to miss. Like they talk about it at the school. Did you talk to Takaya just before the final battle?
Yes.
Where you go to the nightclub?
Yep, you go to the nightclub and then they tell you about the cult and then you meet with Takaya and then you end up meeting with Takaya and you have a conversation with them.
Yeah, I assume it's not in the original game.
No, it's not.
So like, because a lot of those scenes are what makes Takaya feel more involved in the story, as opposed to just showing every once in a while to do their little Team Rocket scheme, maybe shoot someone and leave.
Yeah, but I mean, so while I don't necessarily like Strega like as much, they are kind of like they feel like a shoehorned in antagonist at times.
Mm-hmm.
I do at least like that there is a bit of connection there as far as like personas go, because Makoto he has Thanatos, and then Takaya's persona is actually Hypnos, who's the twin brother of Thanatos. And they're both tied to they're the sons of Nyx, because in Greek mythology Nyx is actually female, which is kind of interesting considering.
It's not lost on me. Revolver Jesus jokes aside, it's not lost on me that Takaya tried to proclaim himself the Messiah. And the game effectively ends with Makoto being the Messiah.
Yeah, Makoto was ultimately the Messiah because he gets Messiah as his ultimate persona, whereas Takaya doesn't. So that's kind of the Jesus analogy in this regard.
It's not lost on me that they're like conflicting character arcs with Jesus analogies. That said, it just feels so undercooked.
Yeah.
And then the other, so I meant that's the first aspect of the story that didn't do it for me. The second aspect was, and this didn't bother me as the game went on, because obviously it wouldn't.
Yeah.
Character introductions were kind of shit.
Yeah.
Like,
honestly,
literally, Junpei's like, I had this awakening moment with my persona a la the other two modern games without because they found out that he had a persona without having to give him a...
Yeah, without having to give him a thing. He's just kind of
just
dropped it
off screen, and they walk him into the dorm, and I'm like, what the fuck?
Yeah, no, they rough-handed those. Or also, how about the Ace Detective, more like Stupe. Did you ever get that scene in there? Oh, God.
Ace Detective?
Ace.
Junpei, more like stupid. Yukari never changed.
Yukari never changed.
And then the biggest place where this hurt, and where actually the movie did it so much better, Fuka.
Yeah.
They tried to, like, you just find Fuka.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking for her, but you don't know who she is. You've never met her up to this point.
Yep.
And they just... the movies actually build up her backstory and her conflict with the bully.
Yeah.
Here, that's not built up at all. You just get the implication the bully... You can talk to him and find out the bully was bullying Fuka.
Mm-hmm.
And then everything just kind of goes down in darkness.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of the one thing that kind of disappointed me here was Fuka's introduction. She's just kind of there, and then you learn about, like, the bully aspect, like, after the fact. So that was one thing the movie actually did well, was fleshing out Fuka a little bit more, and her relationship as it developed with the bully initially. So, there was that. I'm trying to think about... They definitely did, I think... I mean, Akihiko has a really good arc, I think, overall, especially with his...
Oh, yeah, that arc's fucking heartbreaking at times.
Yeah. It's like with it, when you figure out eventually that... you might have figured it out, or at least looked it up, but basically Akihiko... Or, no, okay, yeah, this was explained about, but he had a sister as well growing up, and then he ended up losing her... Did he ever explain how he lost her? Or
I don't remember. It's been a hot minute since
he explained that.
Yeah.
They might have explained how he lost her, but I don't remember. But then he also goes through another arc where then he loses his best friend that grew up with him as well, and that was Shinjiro. Basically, he dies during the dark hour, in part no thanks to Revolver Jesus.
Thank you, Revolver Jesus.
Yep. So there's that whole scene. It does kind of feel a little contrived though, as far as Shinjiro's death is concerned, because it is the dark hour. So it makes me wonder why they couldn't just summon his personas and their personas and use something to heal him. So I'm not sure if there's a real explanation for that.
Yeah, there are some times in this game where it's like we feel like we have to ignore the fact that this is a Persona game for it to make sense.
Yeah.
Like there's that one, and then there's Jin's death.
Yes, that.
You and I were like, you were here while I was playing that part earlier today.
Mm-hmm.
I got to that part. I'm like, wait a minute. That's what 7, 8, 9 shadows. There are 12, 13 of us here right now.
Right. So there's times where a little bit of the story kind of disconnects from what actually happens in the gameplay, and that's kind of like where it's a little jarring for this specific story.
Also, those bullets must be awfully effective if they can kill a Persona user in the dark hour.
Yeah.
Why didn't you use that in the fight, Revolver Jesus?
I know, right? You just instead spammed your Persona, which at times
I'm beginning to think the best Persona is gun.
I know, right?
The Phantom Thieves had it right.
The Phantom Thieves had it right all along. Guns were overpowered. So yeah. That other tangent aside,
sorry.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask: is it guns like Kokumina's gun from like Fate Zero, where he had special bullets?
It's just a revolver. It is just a basic bitch revolver.
It is just like your stereotypical fucking revolver, whatever you think of when you think of a revolver. So yeah. Yeah. There are some disconnects, and they didn't change that.
It feels very PS2 era.
Yes.
Like it feels like it wouldn't be nearly as jarring on the PS2 with your PS2 graphics.
Right.
Because obviously you're not seeing as great detail, so you can assume there's some interpolation going on.
Like actively though, in some cases, it feels like the added detail, thanks to just the raw power and better like design of the stuff like that you can see what's actually happening. In some ways, it kind of works to its detriment. So when it comes to remakes like this, when you add more detail, you kind of sometimes end up taking away things that you can kind of just infer and use your imagination on. So in some ways, it ends up being a detriment to the series to have such better detail.
One area where I think this might be the case, and I feel like I don't know if I've seen something to this to the effect yet online or not. I know people have complained about the coloration of the final Nyx fight, but Nyx didn't seem that big and imposing to me when we got there. And I think part of that was because they were scaled properly.
Yeah.
Like, you're playing the original, you have these, like, the main character graphics are actually kind of...
Yeah.
It looks like they're a little compressed to their full size. Here, though, the main characters are all, like, full size. But the monsters in the original were never compressed. Like, they felt like they were always bigger.
Right, yeah. That's kind of like the point is, and I didn't actually realize this, but this is also something I actually didn't even really have a problem with, but it is something that, now that you are pointing out to me, it does actually kind of make sense that Nyx's character model wasn't compressed, and so they felt like a much more big and imposing threat.
Yeah.
Whereas your party members were a bit smaller in proportion, and that was just to save on processing power for the system.
Because they had to move around and be more complicated.
Yeah. But here, they didn't have to worry about that because they have just so much more raw power, and honestly, anime games like these actually aren't even all that demanding, despite like looking like they might take up more raw processing power in order to use. But because these games, they tend to take like certain other shortcuts that you wouldn't expect, they end up not using as much system resources, so they can end up dedicating those resources into making the actual battlefields be more appropriate and everything. So, yeah, it's a very small nitpick, and it doesn't color my overall opinion of the game. It's still a very solid game. They are just kind of slightly glaring issues on an otherwise really well done game.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my overall thing.
So I don't. This is me editing this, and it's not going into any particular blank slot, so this will probably go relatively soon.
Yeah.
At the time of this release, they haven't released the. We did mention we talk about the stuff that isn't in the game.
Yeah.
They haven't done the answer.
Yeah. They're not calling it the answer, interesting though. They're just calling it episode I guess.
Yeah.
But it is coming in September, so we may come back to a discussion on this one once we have both played through it, and we do get to talk about it. So we'll save that for another separate discussion if this video does well.
I'm glad it's coming. There's been a lot of controversy around the DLC because they charge like 2/3 of the game's price for the DLC.
I'm so glad
the Deluxe Edition.
I'm so glad I ignored all the DLC this time around.
So like, I know why there's controversy, but I'm glad we're getting it in this version because my original plan, not thinking it was coming, was to go pull this motherfucker out because you can play the answer without beating the base game.
Yep.
And just play through the answer in all of its hard bullshit difficulty, apparently, raw, without having ever played the original Persona 3.
Yep. That is exactly
and that would have gone horribly for me.
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely.
I'm curious to see how this will be. Is this going to feel quite that rough? Because I've heard the answer in the original gameplay-wise especially was very rough.
Yeah, and it was mostly just due down to the fact that gameplay-wise, you couldn't summon from the compendium. I really, really hope Atlas learns the lesson and doesn't do that again.
Yeah.
And if they do, I might honestly just wait and see, like if you can actually summon from the compendium. Because if they don't, I might honestly just watch a playthrough of this separately, someone else. Because also it's just gonna be because the other thing is too is that this whole episode is going to be mostly just combat.
It's all Tartarus.
It is all an inverse Tartarus.
I have to wonder if how much they're going to mess with Tartarus this time around because this Tartarus had the luxury the original Tartarus had the social link stuff in the middle. They won't have that luxury for a second time. It didn't work very well last time. Are they going to tinker with Tartarus a little bit more, or
maybe they'll do something like they'll add like little side stories that you can do as Igus with different party members.
Because I know there's different stops, and that Tartarus has blocks as well.
Yeah. So there are like certain points where you do stop in the story. So maybe what they'll do to kind of break up that flow a little bit is they might add little extra like side activities that you can do with the individual given party members that do join you for that portion.
Tartarus is so wild to me, my understanding in Fast. Like you have the original Tartarus from Persona 3, which is Tartarus in all its tedious glory.
Mm-hmm.
Then they added Monog below it.
Yep.
Which is just an extra bullshit entire block that you don't want to do but you grind in. And then they added Tartarus 2 Electric Boogaloo as episode X. Why did they add more Tartarus to Fest?
You know, I get that this was part of Atlas's last-ditch attempt to preserve their company, but man, it's just like, holy shit, the grind is real.
I think we had a lot to go into, but I think that covers the
bulk
right?
of it, yeah. But I do have some stuff that I want to talk about as more so theories for Persona 6, just speculation, a speculation section, if you will. So because Makoto has the Jesus metaphor, I want to see if Atlas will go down the route where basically Jesus comes back in 3 days, or he came back in 3 days, where basically so this is my speculation. So since Igor's Japanese voice actor, he died, but I think it was around the time of actually Persona 5, and that's why you have the different voice actor for him at the start of Persona 5. But what I'm expecting, what might end up happening, and I could see happening, is that Makoto becomes the new Velvet Room head.
Maybe. I mean, it feels like they've been for a while they were dancing around that. Maybe if we were talking after 5, I might think that because like you have 5 and they reused the voice lines for both. They reuse the voice lines where they need to for Igor, and then he's just not in the spinoffs, and I don't think he's usually in the spinoffs.
Yeah, he's usually not anyways.
But then 3 they recast him, which is a big step in Japan.
Yeah.
That to me, is where things feel like, okay, if they went to the effort of recasting him for the remake, it feels like the death of the voice actor, it still sucks, but it's not as it's not as much of a what are they going to do from here moment anymore. Now they have a voice actor.
Now they have a new
established
voice actor. Okay, that makes more sense. But this is more so just fun speculation on my part. I'm not even sure if we're gonna get a scene or anything like that, like of him being released, because the thing is, and this is mostly tied to the to once again the fighting game spinoff. At the end of that, Elizabeth actually gets her own Fool's Journey card, so she is technically on her own Fool's Journey at the time.
I have heard about like some of the spin-off progression of this subplot.
Yeah.
It's like I almost feel like they have to keep this relegated to the spin-offs. Because Persona games so far, part of the appeal feels like it's been that each individual one is its own giant standalone thing and basically spins off into its own sub-franchise.
Yeah.
I feel like if we're going to continue the Makoto Jesus plotline, you'd almost have to do it as a spin-off.
Yeah.
Like, even if it, because that allows you to, A, work with the assumption that people will at least know the events of 3.
Yeah.
And B, like, I did spoil myself a bit on the answer. Because we watched the movies, and I looked at what happened in the answer as well. And I won't spoil it here, but to my understanding, there was a lot of theories around some of the similar terminology used in 5 for some of the stuff that was talked about in the answer. So a lot of theories on that, and it also got us like extra expansion in the fighting games, which were I'm on FGO brain. It was a crossover between 3 and 4. So it almost feels like you got to keep it to a spin-off, if not a crossover game.
That is true. That does make sense, at least. But I know that the other thing is, too, is that from what I understand, the way that Atlas is going to be releasing the Persona 6 story is that there's going to be a lot more DLC to it. And
I could see it being a DLC thing as well.
Yeah. So
Xenoblade did something like that, where the main game was mostly standalone, but the DLC was like the big, giant series fan service extravaganza.
Yeah. So, like, and they're planning, and from what I understand, at least as far as, like, the leaks that we have of Persona 6 right now, is that it's going to be a semi-open world, but still have the calendar system.
I'm curious to see how it's going to work. I have no idea what to expect.
Yeah.
Because it feels like between 5 Royal and 3 Reload, I feel like we've refined the 3 system as much as I could possibly imagine it.
Yeah.
Like, anything else on top of this feels like it'll be gimmicky.
Yeah, that's true. But one thing that kind of worries me about this is because every Persona game after this has progressively gotten longer and longer, and so if we were going to have a semi-open world, man, this could potentially become like a 200-plus hour RPG, and I don't know if I even have the will to do that.
I hope they stick with the DLC thing, though, instead of doing let's just release a new game.
Yeah, so we'll see. Like, basically, like, what they might do is they might add in some, like, additional, like, content so that way we don't have to rebuy, like, later on, Persona 6, the ultimate, like, whatever the fuck edition later on.
You know what? This is probably a good conversation to get into with you because you played Portable. We don't have to stick on this phone. I don't really want to stick on this for too long.
Yeah.
The Fency in the room.
Ah, yes, the Fency. She's beloved by many, but not by Atlas.
Well, it's such a big undertaking to actually add her into the game.
Yes, and I think the whole reason that they even went as far as to add her for Portable was because the base game was kind of limited, and because it was on the PSP, and so it became an issue, like, as far as processing power, so they had to turn 3 into essentially a visual novel. But they wanted to add in some extra content to incentivize people to buy that version. So they created a whole separate MC, in this case the Femc, also Kotone.
Yeah, and her not being included here was very, very controversial.
Yes, it was, because the problem that Persona 3 specifically has always had is there's never been a true definitive version with both the answer and the FemC. And so what people were hoping for when they made Reload is that this would include both the answer and the FemC route. And we are getting the answer in episode Aegis, but we're not getting the FemC as far as Atlas is telling us.
Yeah.
So what has been happening a lot recently is people have been trying to get her out of jail by modding her in by force. So
I'm curious to see where these fan projects go.
Yeah, I'm very, very curious to see, because
I imagine it will take. I could see it happening eventually if Persona fans are this persistent.
yes,
But it's going to be a long time. Adding new, because the FemC route was not just a model change.
yeah, it
It
wasn't.
was like completely different gameplay. The story was altered.
Yes.
New.
New social links were added, so like some of the social links weren't even the same.
It would require a complete change of scripting,
Yep.
which if you have source code is easy. If you're basically making a ROM hack,
Yeah,
it is so much harder. We are like Pokemon, famous ROM hacking scene. We are only just now getting like tools for doing scripting better to make like full new games using the old base for the DS era.
jeez.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, with the FemC, the mods are cool, but you're not going to see people suddenly able to add a full FemC reload.
Well, considering
For years.
considering that this is like the first major Persona release that has happened on PC, it's probably a little bit easier for everyone to like access the data. Though obviously they might not necessarily access the source code.
No, source code they will not have access to. Source code, like, that has to be leaked.
Yeah.
Not saying it needs, I'm not calling for people to leak it, by the way. That would be illegal.
Yeah.
But, like, that's the only reason why, like, if you get source code leaks, that's when you start seeing games, like you can really go in and easily modify the scripting.
Yeah. So that's kind of the main thing. So unless that source code is just like out there in the open, essentially metaphorical dicks swinging in the wind, like it's probably going to take a little while longer.
You're going to see the completion of FemC and Fest before you see it in Reload long before then.
Yeah, and especially if they want to, and especially if this modding community wants to go as far as to make a version of the answer where the FemC makes an appearance, then this could even potentially take longer.
Yeah. That said, it's a really cool fan effort. Go give it a look if you're really interested.
Give it a look. It's already got some amazing progress in the amount of time that it's been going on for.
She's functional gameplay-wise, more or less, at this point.
Yeah, it's just that the voice acting hasn't been added and the new social links haven't been added yet.
Yeah.
But fucking Kotone fans being like pulling a Thanos like, fine, I'll do it myself.
On that note, I think we need to wrap this up because my computer is dying and I'm getting it's screaming at me here.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed our first, but not, I'm sure it won't be the only in given time, video game off the shelf.
Yeah.
Come back again next time for whatever we do. It'll probably be Seki and I. It could be Realm and Seki.
Yeah, we'll see.
So, yeah, we'll see you next time, guys.
Try harder, everybody.